There's a dance in nature that goes on in Upper New York State, where I grew up until age 10. And it happens between the temperature, the deciduous trees, I think of the pussy willows. And as the fall comes and the temperature decreases and the wind increases, the leaves turn yellow, the tree is stripped bare of that which would wither and become frostbitten and snap the branches in the snow. In Upper New York, the snow falls 3 feet thick, sometimes in a week, and the weight on big deciduous leaves, the cold on such tender veins, would risk the branches. Weighting them down with snow and ice would burn the leaves with cold temperatures, and they are discarded. And slowly, as the tree sits dormant in the winter, as spring comes, even before the snow is melted, as the temperatures raise, buds form in synchrony with the snow melting, with the temperature rising. And little pussy willow blooms are some of the first to come out, even before new leaves. And as the snow melts further, new leaves bud out, and by the time the snow has melted and the temperature is raised, the whole forest is budding with new green leaves. And this dance of parity between delicacy and temperature is not just a dance between trees and snow. It also happens in the human psyche. As infants are born and crushed by the psychological weight of shame, ignorance, trauma, abandonment, fear, physical, mental, sexual abuse, they cover the tenderness. They drop the leaves of innocence, of empathy, of joy and playfulness, and become mired in depression, in bottom line beliefs of worthlessness. I'm useless, I'm worthless, I deserve to be punished, in armoring, in apathy, in refusing to expect anything good that can withstand the pummeling snow of a psychologically illiterate cult, of an intergenerational family abuse pattern. And if the child is fortunate enough to survive in that shielding, they eventually grow up, leave home, perhaps go through an adolescence of throwing off the dogmas, the ignorance, the stupidity and cruelty of their family system. Perhaps in doing so recognize some of the cruelty and stupidity in the cult in which they are born. And create for themselves a warmer microclimate, finding perhaps a partner who is actually capable of loving to some degree, spending some time with a dog that knows how to attune and regulate energy, enjoying a hobby and not being shamed and cut down and violated in that space. And some of those shadow shields fall away as the temperature of a lifetime rises and the consciousness begins to come out of the reptilian brain of fight, flight, freeze, and out of the reactionary brain of limbic reactivity into the rational brain of beginning to see things and think for ourselves. And through that rationality, through that freedom, creating a reality that is warmer, that does not need such sacrifice as in the shedding of the leaves in order to survive. And a budding sense of empathy, a budding glimmer of transcendence, caring about things that are bigger, that are beyond the individual self. And in this journey, the blossoming of the authentic self, the most tender self, the transcendent and spiritual self. Now, sometimes this blooming process is forced. In sexual relationships without the container of boundary of commitment, the orgasm of two energies coming together and forming a third energy can give birth to this transcendent, to this empathic self. Whether or not the stewards of the relationship are capable of managing the temperature. In cases where the container is betrayed, where that third energy is violated, the frost enters the doorway of the violation, filling the space, and the bloom in mid-bloom is consumed by frost. And the fruit that can come out of such a bloom is stillborn, is stagnant. The baby does not come out alive. And there is a grief and a trauma of what is lost and a fear of the blooming process happening again, a fear of other people, a fear of oneself, a lack of competency in holding the container. In my own experience with a psychedelic journey with a therapist, Peter Sandhill, referred and trained and taught by the Human Awareness Institute, I experienced under the influence of psychedelics, of MDMA, a transcendent, a deeply empathic and deeply transcendent experience. The joy of blooming in a heat created by a 10-hour chemical overlay. Peter Sandhill was not trained to hold container for this. A therapist is not supposed to escalate a romantic relationship with a client. let alone under the influence of psychedelics. And Peter Sandhill did, giving birth to a love, giving birth to a third energy, giving birth to a blossom that to me was sacred and to be honored. But having broken his marital agreements, having broken his therapeutic agreements with the Human Awareness Institute, having violated every therapeutic guideline in the book, he saw the phenomena, the incident, as something frightening to run away from, to break container. And the frost and the snow came in. And that essence that was born, that awareness of a spirituality, froze over. And I was in that bloom, having identified with the bloom, was unable to provide a greenhouse on my own, was unsupported, as is so often the case when a male impregnates a woman and then breaks container, disowns that third energy, walks away, leaving the woman pregnant with the consequence of that heat, the bloom that only occurred because of the heat, because of that environment. In this case, the heat of Peter's affection, the heat of 2 strong psychedelic compounds, and the heat of my spirit and energy released, much like a deciduous tree put in a greenhouse in February and pumped with fertilizer. You can accelerate the budding. But if that acceleration is not sustainable, if after force heating that tree and initiating a bloom and leaf cycle, the greenhouse is shattered, the heat is turned off, and the gardener walks away, the tree is left freezing and the crop is lost. That season of crop is lost. And what this speaks to is that there is an art and a commitment involved in creating a microclimate that's at odds with the larger cult climate. The American cult is at a cold and sociopathic temperature not suitable to giving birth to the transcendent regions of the brain. In that state, 99% of the people in that temperature will not open into transcendent states. Because if they did, the frost of sociopathic protocols would damage the bloom and the crop would be lost. Cultures are on long-term evolutionary cycles where if things proceed in accordance with nature, the temperature rises. A reptile becomes a mammal. A mammal becomes vaguely conscious. a mammal becomes a human animal, dictated largely by fight, flight, and freeze, dictated largely by reactivity, by a lack of awareness. And then the rational brain, the witness and observer of patterns of energy, comes online, initially to facilitate warfare, to plan ahead, to project the spear into the future, to see the threat and develop a response. But as that brain develops the ability to create law, order, abundance, free market economies, structures that decrease the volatility of living as 30 people in the wilderness to living in a neighborhood of regulated temperatures, of regulated electricity, of regulated water, of regulated heat, of regulated food systems and transportation systems. There's a stability. And we move beyond survival into security. As a majority. And then beyond security into beginning to explore something called love and belonging. Not just the love of the child of need. I need you. I depend on you. The love of the adolescent of lust. I want you. I desire you. You have to meet my needs. To the love of an adult that loves enough to care, that cares enough to take time, that takes enough time to see, that sees enough to understand, that understands enough to empathize, that empathizes enough to attune, that attunes enough to succeed, and succeeds enough to facilitate not only one's own ascension through the hierarchy of human needs, survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, developing and discovering our gifts, bringing those gifts valuably and abundantly into the world, and then becoming part of something bigger than ourselves, succeeding enough to facilitate first our own and then another person surviving. Moving from survival to security, sustainably. Not just becoming dependent, but to facilitate the art, the skill of sustainably surviving with security. Of knowing oneself so that one can love and embrace oneself. Of knowing and loving and embracing faces of the self so that the corresponding faces in another can be welcomed, can be seen, can be loved. Of developing values and ideals and principles, protocols for achieving those values and ideals, and the discipline to follow those protocols into self-esteem. Discovering the uniqueness. To do that for another person. To be an ally, committed to their survival, security, love and belonging, the opportunity to develop an awareness of their values, to discover what they're good at, to bring that valuably into the world with abundance, and then to find some meaning in a larger sense of self. That capacity to love is not common in our cult. Survival, security, of survival has been accessed by a majority. But love and belonging, the self-awareness necessary to love and invite the facets of the self to belong, is untouched by more than a small minority, and uncompetently integrated by almost all. It is a rare parent that has the talent to know themselves enough to know the corresponding face in their child, and to embrace what they know with understanding and love. And love and understanding from the adult is like water on a plant. Love is the water of the psyche. Without love, the psyche does not blossom, does not grow, does not become self-actualized. Love is the water of the psyche. And much like a gardener chastising a tomato plant, come on, make me a fresh tomato, or I will not give you any water. Come on, produce another one. I will not bless you with water until you produce, until you have made it. You see, we are a cult that shames losers and celebrates and loves winners. And we have far more losers than winners because we shame losers and love winners. If we love losers, they grow into winners. We are a cult that conditionally waters tomato plants after they produce, and most of them wither for lack of water. To truly take the time to see and be seen is water for the psyche, for an adult, not a grown-up, not a giant bully, not a confused child in a grown-up body, but for an adult to see and hold space for who we are, understanding the innate connection between what is seen and held in me and what is seen and held in you. To embrace what is a rare experience that many of our young people have not received for more than 5 minutes of their entire life. Perhaps there's one teacher. Perhaps there's one neighbor. Perhaps there's someone doing a job that they encounter. Perhaps that adult, of which there are few, has the chance to look at a child for 5 minutes before a shame-based child who's been taught in so many actions that they're not worthy looks away. Grateful for the glance, but aware that they cannot blossom into the flower that emerges in that glance, because as soon as they get back home, the angry older brother, the shaming mother, the absent father will blast cold air, will re-trigger the reptilian brain, and that budding blossom will ice over again, regressing the individual back to reptilian times. Because only the reptilian brain has no feeling, and at certain levels of cruelty, it is too painful to feel anything. And the reptilian brain raises a hand and says, I've got this. You are surrounded by reptiles. I have a reptilian operating system. I can keep you alive amongst these snakes until you have a chance to soar out of this snake den and shed some of that hate, some of that terror, melt some of that ice, and feel the overwhelming grief of the time lost before soaring off in the joy, in the beauty, in the wonder that is on the other side and is only touchable through the empathic and transcendent regions of the brain.